Apparently, telling one adult woman that the sample tray was not her lunch is now food policing, which is interesting, because I thought a free sample was supposed to be a taste, not a tiny buffet with toothpicks. And before anyone says it was just a sample, let me tell you where this ended. The employee moved the cheese tray behind the soup pot. The woman called me obsessed, and I somehow became the reason the whole deli section got quiet. So yes, technically, I got involved. I was at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, which is already a hostile environment disguised as errands. The parking lot was full, the carts were sticky, and everyone in the store had the same blank expression of people trying to buy dinner before their patience expired. I only needed coffee, salad dressing, eggs, and one rotisserie chicken. That was it, a small trip, a controlled trip. The kind of trip where I carry a basket instead of a cart, because I believe I'm above complications. That belief lasted about 7 minutes. I was passing the deli section when I smelled soup. Not real soup exactly. Grocery store sample soup, the kind served in tiny paper cups that somehow makes adults stop walking like they have discovered culture. There was a sample table set up near the deli, a warming pot, a stack of tiny cups, a tray of cheese cubes, a few crackers, and an employee in a hairnet who looked like she had already said, "Would you like to try one?" So many times her soul had started answering for her. The sign said, "Try a sample." A sample, not a meal plan. There were maybe 4 people waiting. Nothing dramatic, just a few adults pretending they happened to be near the table and had not been pulled in by free food. I stood nearby because I wanted to try the soup. Yes, I wanted the sample too. I am not above soup in a paper cup. I have never claimed to be. If you enjoy watching a normal grocery trip turn into a public argument over cheese cubes, subscribe, because apparently leave some for other people is now controversial. At first, everything was normal. A man took one tiny cup, tasted it, nodded like he had been invited to judge a cooking show, and walked away. A woman took one cheese cube, said, "Oh, that's good," and immediately put the package in her cart. Beautiful, efficient, a model citizen of the sample table. Then she arrived. The woman, mid-50s, sunglasses on top of her head, oversized tote bag on her shoulder, phone in one hand, and the calm confidence of someone who had found free food and decided the rules were now flexible. She stepped up to the table. The employee smiled and said, "Would you like to try the tomato basil soup?" The woman said, "Sure, fine." She took one tiny cup, then another, then she took one cheese cube, then another. Then she dipped the cheese cube into the soup cup. I blinked, because that already felt like a little more commitment than the table was built for. The employee kept smiling politely, the way employees smile when they know a customer is becoming a situation. The woman said, I'm still deciding. Still deciding, a phrase people use while actively eating the thing they are supposedly undecided about. Then she took another soup cup. 3. I counted, not because I wanted to count, because the number became available to me. I was standing behind her with my basket, trying to keep a normal face, but she did not move. She stood right at the front of the sample table, phone in hand, eating, dipping, considering and blocking the entire tray. Another shopper behind me leaned slightly to see around her. The employee said, "The soup is on sale today," the woman said. "I know, I'm thinking with her mouth full." Then she took another cheese cube. 4 cheese cubes, 3 soup cups, no purchase, no movement, just occupation. I said nothing at first. That matters. I am capable of silence. I just do not always choose it for long. The employee refilled the tray with a few more cups. The woman watched the refill happen like she had been waiting for a second act. Then she took one of the new cups before anyone else could reach. That was when something inside me sat up. I said, lightly, "Oh, are we doing rounds?" The woman turned her head. Not fully, just enough to show she had heard me and already disliked me. She said, "Excuse me?" I said, "Nothing. I just noticed you were on, I think, sample number 4. Was that necessary? No. Was it accurate? Yes." The man behind me made a small sound. Not a laugh exactly. More like a laugh that remembered it still had errands. The woman said, "I'm deciding if I like it." I said, "Usually the first few bites help." The employee looked down at the napkins. "That is never good," the woman said. "It's a free sample," I said. Exactly. Sample, not lunch. There it was. The sentence. I heard it leave my mouth and knew immediately we were not having a normal grocery moment anymore. The woman stared at me. Are you seriously monitoring samples? I said, I'm standing here. It's happening in front of me. She picked up another cheese cube, slowly. Not because she needed it, because now it was personal. The employee said, there's plenty. That was kind of her. It was also not completely true. There were maybe 6 cheese cubes left, and this woman was looking at them like she had plans. The woman said, see, there's plenty. I said there was plenty before you started settling in. That was too much. I know that now. But the man behind me smiled, and unfortunately I accepted that as public approval. Tell me in the comments, how many samples can one adult take before it stops being sampling? The woman picked up another soup cup. 5. I said, that's 5. She spun around. Did you just count? I said, not intentionally. You made it easy. The employee closed her eyes for half a second. The man behind me stepped back, physically separating himself from my choices. The woman said, you need a hobby. I said, I had one. It was getting groceries. Then this happened. Again, not my softest work. At that moment, a second employee came over with a fresh tray of toasted bread pieces. Fresh material, bad timing. The woman reached first. Of course she did. She grabbed 2 pieces. Then she said, my husband might want to try one. I looked around. No husband, no man approaching, no wave from seafood, just the idea of a husband being used as extra sample storage. I said, is he here? She said, he's over by seafood. I said, then he can come taste it with his own mouth. The first employee made a sound into her sleeve. I should have stopped. I did not stop. The woman said, you are being incredibly rude. I said, I am being aware of sharing at a sample table. That is when even I knew I was getting unpleasant. But by then I was in too deep. If I backed down, the cheese cubes had suffered for nothing. The woman placed 1 bread piece on a napkin and said, this is for my husband. I said, of course, the seafood husband. The man behind me whispered, oh boy, and left the line completely. Coward. Reasonable coward, but still. The employee said, ma'am, I can give you a coupon if you'd like to purchase the soup. Beautiful sentence. Professional, gentle, clear. A polite way of saying, please either buy the soup or step away from the tiny cups. The woman said, I'm still deciding. I said, at this point, I think the soup has given you enough information. Silence, a real one. The kind where you suddenly hear the fluorescent lights. The woman's face tightened. What is wrong with you? Fair question. Not one I wanted to answer in public, I said. I'm just trying to get 1 sample before dinner. The employee quickly handed me a tiny soup cup, like she was trying to calm down a raccoon. I took it, and I should have moved away. That would have been the adult ending. I got the sample, I won, leave. Instead, I tasted it right there and said, see? 1 was enough. The woman looked at me like she might actually throw a toothpick. The employee moved the cheese tray slightly behind the soup pot. Subtle, but I saw it. The woman saw it too. She said, now look what you did. I said I didn't move the cheese. The employee said, I'm just making room. No, she wasn't. She was protecting the cheese from both of us. The woman said, you embarrassed me over free food. I said, you were building a plate. She said, I was sampling. I said, you had courses. Was it funny? A little. Was it helpful? No, and that is one of my recurring issues. I confuse funny with useful. The woman picked up her tote bag, took the coupon without buying anything, and said, some people are miserable. I said, some people are full. She walked away. The employee looked at me, not warmly, not gratefully, just looked. I said, I only wanted 1 sample. She said, okay, just okay. No smile, no little nod. No silent thank you for defending the dignity of the tray. That hurt more than it should have. I walked toward the coffee aisle holding 1 tiny paper cup like evidence from a trial nobody had asked for. And here is the worst part. The soup was not even good. Too salty, which made the whole thing feel less noble. I finished my shopping quickly. Coffee, eggs, salad dressing, rotisserie chicken. I avoided the deli section on the way back because I did not want to see if the cheese was still in protective custody. At checkout, the cashier said, "Find everything okay?" And I said, "Mostly." Mostly. Why did I say mostly? Because some sick part of me wanted her to ask. She did not ask. Growth denied. I thought that was the end. It was not the end that night. My sister sent me a screenshot from the local neighborhood group. Of course she did. The post said, "To the woman at the grocery store who loudly shamed another customer for taking samples. Please remember, not everyone can afford extras. Kindness costs nothing." Loudly shamed. Taking samples. Extras. The 5 soup cups, the cheese cubes, and the seafood husband were not mentioned. That is how history gets edited. The comments were exactly what you would expect. People are awful. Maybe she was hungry. Mind your business. Samples are there to be taken. Now, let me say this clearly. If someone is truly hungry, I am not mocking that. I am not against people eating. I am not against free samples. I am against one adult standing at the front of the table, turning a tray into a private appetizer bar while everyone else waits. There is a difference. My sister texted, "Please tell me this wasn't you," I said. "Define shamed," she said. "Did you count a woman's samples?" I said. I observed a pattern. My husband from the couch said, "That sounds like yes." I said, "It sounds like data." He said, "Did you say not lunch?" I paused. He said, "That also sounds like yes." A week later, I went back to the same grocery store, not because of the sample table. I needed eggs. Near the deli section, there was a new little sign beside the sample station. "Please take one sample so others may try." Now, am I saying the sign existed because of me? No. I'm simply saying the sign did not exist before the sample incident. That is all. So no, I do not regret saying something. I regret saying it loudly enough that strangers learned the phrase seafood husband. I regret that I turned a tiny cup of soup into a public hearing. And I regret, slightly, that I can no longer walk past that deli employee without her moving the cheese tray closer to herself. Next time, I'll tell you what happened when a man left his cart sideways in the cereal aisle and walked away like he had parked a boat. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because if I have to keep explaining the difference between trying a sample and settling in for lunch, we might as well all learn from it together. I was not food policing. I was not attacking a hungry person. I was protecting the sample tray from becoming one woman's private buffet. My side of the story, obviously,